It's already rolling? Oh, What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Calgary Barbell. We're gonna do another Form Check Friday. Believe it or not, it is Friday, and this is what we do on Fridays. So getting right to it, our first one, we're gonna kind of group our first two here together because I kind of want to talk about some similar things between the two videos and actually refer you guys to another YouTuber that I watch and would recommend fully. First video here comes from Emil. Now, Emil sent me a couple of a deadlift and a squat. His squat looks great. I wouldn't change anything about your squat there, Emil. The deadlift, now it looks like we're kind of starting a little bit in front of the bar. So the shoulders are a little bit out in front of the bar. Deadlift, still a lot of weight, still really good speed. I don't think that, there's a lot wrong here, but I think if you can maybe get yourself back over the bar a little bit better, that would help a fair bit. And this next video comes from Josh Vernaz, and he's looking at a very, very similar sort of dysfunction, starting out in front of the bar, needing to maybe get a little bit of back extension, but mostly just needs to get back on his heels a little further. Now, I want to refer you guys to a video by a guy named JP Couchy. He's an Australian lifter, super strong guy, great deadlifter, and he talks in one of his recent videos about how to position yourself further back on your heels by moving through the ankles to sort of displace your whole body's weight back, so your shoulders in line with the bar, you're more behind the bar. So I want you guys specifically to check that video out, and for anybody else who's wondering about their deadlift starting position, I found that video really helpful, and definitely follow that guy because he puts out a lot of good content regularly. Next one here comes from Tony. So Tony wants us to look at his deadlift as well. Now, the biggest thing I see with Tony is just kind of not pulling the slack out. So it looks like you're starting loose on the bar and then you kind of jerk into it, which makes for a bit of an inconsistent starting position, or would if it were multiple reps. The other thing I think we need to do is try to maybe push your knees out a little bit. So I think what's happening is you're not able to get good back extension because your hips are kind of in your own way. So when you go to pull your back in, you can only pull your back so flat because your quads are actually hitting your trunk. So I want you to think about pushing your feet out a little bit. Might want to widen the stance a tiny bit, play with that, see how it feels. But the biggest thing, push the knees out, try to get a little bit more back extension. And as you sit your butt down to the bar, you should be actively pulling yourself into the bar with your lats. That's gonna pull the slack out of the bar and make sure that you're a little more braced for the initial stages of your pull. Next one comes from Taylor Shoemaker. Taylor's doing some squats here. He's coming back from an adductor injury, he says. So looking at his squat, there's a couple of things I want Taylor to try to do. I want you to play with a narrower stance, first and foremost, because you're fairly wide, and if you've had some adductor trouble, going a little bit narrower can maybe take some of those stresses off your hips. The other thing I want you to watch is on the first rep here, if you watch Taylor's left foot, you can see at the very bottom position of his squat, his arch collapse on his foot and it kind of inverts just a little bit, everts just a little bit. Now this can do a lot of interesting things all the way up the chain into your hips too. So I want you to try and find some exercises for your arch. I think there's some different stuff you can do with the towel. Maybe use a lacrosse ball or something to roll out the bottom of your foot, work your calves a little bit. Some of that kind of stuff, just work on general ankle health. That's something that actually Dylan's been doing a lot of. He's rehabbing from a hip injury quite similar to mine, and he's found one of the biggest things that's changed things for him for the better has been working with the arch in his feet.
So just looking at the video, like Bryce said, I would definitely say moving your stance in will help a lot. That is what I did. I used to squat super wide. One thing that I do though now when I come into the gym is I'll roll both my feet with a lacrosse ball, spend only like 1 minute, roll areas that hurt the most. After that, move on to a ankle stretch, and the stretch I do is I tie a band thicker than this, but I mean if this is all you have, this will work, around like a post. Put it around your ankle, make sure your foot has a really good arch on it, and then move if this is your leg, move your leg to as far as you can without really hurting it. So you want to feel a good stretch and really try to force your, like if my elbow is your knee, this is kind of a funny way of showing it, but you want to force it more outwards as if you were squatting or I guess deadlifting, without letting this collapse every time you stretch it. I'm finding that's making a huge difference on being able to maintain an arch throughout the squat. And like, I mean, beyond that, just being really mindful of where your foot is while you're squatting. So make sure there's an arch throughout the whole squat. It's gonna feel weird definitely might feel a little weird, but it'll make a huge difference in the future if you keep practicing it, and it should keep you a little bit more healthy and injury-free.
More healthier. So the next one here comes from Jimmy Dusick. Now he is doing some squats here. All right, so Jimmy, there's a couple things I want you to work on here. The first one is that it looks like your elbows are way back behind you. Now you end up in a pretty decent position at the bottom, but we're still back here, and I want you to try to pull those elbows down along with the shoulder. So try and pull that shoulder down your back, pull it in towards your spine a little bit, and try to tuck that elbow in underneath. We should be seeing a little bit of a straighter wrist with a thumbs over grip. You see a lot of guys with the thumbs under end up in this sort of position. That seems to be okay, but with the thumbs over grip, I want to see you with a little bit of a straighter wrist. The other thing is I would probably try and, I mean, this may or may not be doable, but I would try and squat not in front of a mirror. Because it looks like that's kind of messing with what you're focusing on with your eyes. I can tell through a couple of reps you're kind of looking down, your head position changes throughout the set. So that's another thing I would really cue you to try and work on is pick a point and just stare there. Now for you, we're gonna wanna look, yeah, you could probably look a little bit down. So like the bottom bar just under the mirror, sort of the wood border underneath the mirror might be a good place to focus. But just try to keep that head a little bit more neutral and try not to let it move or move your focus throughout the lift. All right, now Jimmy sent in some deadlifts as well. Now, not a lot going wrong technically per se, but the biggest thing I'm seeing is that Jimmy's doing touch and go with his deadlifts here. Now that's definitely not something I'd recommend, especially with sumo Jimmy, because you're gonna find the hardest part is off the floor. And if you're just sort of tapping going off of the floor, you're almost skipping that range of motion by utilizing a stretch reflex that's not gonna be there when you go to pull a heavy single. Now, we wanna be as good as we can at pulling heavy singles, so what I'm gonna recommend is just stop doing touch and go deadlifts. Even if it's high reps, even if it's sets of 7, 10, 15, whatever, either don't program those because they're hard, which is what I would do, is just don't do anything above 5. But if you do, don't touch and go. Make sure you get a dead stop every rep so we can really work on getting strong off the floor and not lose that. So our next one here is from Paul Kehoe. There's a couple things I want you to do here. He's a high bar squatter. So you'll watch him set up here, looking very much like John Hack with the headband. The biggest thing I want you to try to do, Paul, is I want you to try and control the weight a little bit lower. So with most high bar squatters, we're gonna kind of get to a point where we're gonna utilize a fair bit of stretch reflex. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it looks like you're sort of dive bombing from a little bit too high. What I would recommend you do is try to sit a little bit lower with control and utilize maybe I don't know, a half of the range of motion that you're dropping through, as opposed to dropping through. So if you're dropping through like a foot range of motion, drop through 6 inches range of motion. Just trim down how much you're loosening and bouncing through, and that should help a lot with staying tight out of the bottom. If you look at sort of how much your orientation changes as you come out of the bottom range of motion, you're actually losing it quite a bit forward because of how loose you are and because of how far you're going loose. Another thing that I think might help with staying generally tight a little bit better is I would play with widening your grip. You're super packed in on your shoulders. Now for a lot of people that works really well. One thing that I've found with a number of lifters is that going a little bit wider actually helps you get your lats set and gets your lats a little bit more engaged throughout the lift. So going a little wider might actually help you to get that sort of pull on the bar and keep your upper back set a little bit better. If you guys are sending Form Check Fridays, please send them to Calgary Barbell 22222 at gmail.com. There's been a couple come to the Calgary Barbell regular email. Now this is probably an oversight in making the Form Check Friday email just Calgary Barbell 2 at gmail.com. It's not different enough, and you can thank Dylan for that. But yeah, just try to make sure it's coming to Calgary Barbell 2. Next one from Nicolas De Benedetto. So looking at his deadlift here, set of 5 at 240 pounds. Now he says that he needs to drop his hips lower, trying to keep his lats tighter, and he's working on finishing with his glutes a little bit better. So his deadlift is his worst lift, he says, and he wants us to take a look at it. So I definitely agree with you on getting the hips lower, Nick. It looks like you're starting from a really high position. So I'm glad to hear that you're working on that. I definitely want you to also try and slow down a little bit off the floor, because it looks like that initial push where you kind of rush off the floor is where the hips shoot up even more. So I think if you slow down off the floor and not sort of rush that first position or that first phase of the pull, we're gonna see less of the hips shooting up. It's gonna be easier for you to stay in a more upright position and keep your lats on a little bit better. That leads into my next point. Try to keep your lats on a little better. I think you know what that means, and it looks like you're already trying to do that, so keep working on that. That's a good cue. The other thing is try to pull the slack out a little more. Now this goes hand in hand with turning the lats on a little bit better, or using the lats better rather. So just try to use the pull of the bar and the weight of the bar to set your hips. So when you're sitting your butt down, you should be almost like pulling your butt down to the bar using your lats. So lots and lots more tension in the lats to pull the slack out of the bar as well. Next one, Joe Kinzig. All right, Joe Kinzig from Ohio. So the biggest thing I'm seeing in your squats here is that we need to keep better back extension, specifically in the low back. Looks like your upper back's staying in a decent position. You're already in squat shoes, so we're kind of limiting the necessity for ankle mobility in the bottom position. Yeah, we just need to get you more upright, man. I would try to cut your depth a little bit. Looks like you're going pretty deep and loosening right up into the bottom. I'd work with some really tight pause squats, like right at or below parallel, and try to work on maintaining good position as you sink into the bottom. So instead of sort of compromising your back and just sinking into the bottom position, I want you to stay really tight through your core and through your back, and braced really tight, and force those hips to stretch as you hit the bottom. One thing that I found really beneficial or really useful for people in your position that have that sort of tendency is to do like what I call a progressive box squat. So I want you to start off squatting to whatever depth you can get to, keeping your back nice and tight and not losing that extension. Now, ideally, you're gonna have some kind of box with like a number of plates, and then each week you're gonna pull a plate out of there to try and get deeper while maintaining that same degree of back extension, that same degree of bracing in the core. So hopefully that helps. And that's it for Form Check Friday. Woo! We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for continuing to send in videos. We are on to January 4th now, so we will get to your videos soon as we can. Bye-bye.